I have to just say, you're just so radiant. I mean, the look, obviously, but your personality as well. And I'm also looking forward to getting to know more about your own work, because I've been looking, my daughters and I, we all looked at some of your show reel and your website, and I'd love, during this conversation, but beyond this as well, I'd love to stay in touch about that and keep up with what you're what you're doing.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
How are you?
Oh my goodness, we persevered and have made it happen.
I'm so happy.
Hey, we're a little bit matchy too.
I know, loving it.
We're in sync with our thoughts, that's what it is.
So lovely to meet you.
I want to give you a hug.
No, I feel the same. I'm sending you a lot of love from over here in Maine, where it's 8 degrees Fahrenheit outside today. Wow. So I'm giving you an extra tight hug because it's particularly cold.
Yes, it's quite cold here as well, actually. It's not that cold, but yes, it is a bit nippy. So we have the heating on and the fire. I was very tempted to have a hot water bottle on my knee as we have this interview.
I actually feel like I've met a very old friend or a long lost sister.
When you first came on screen, I was like, I know this girl. I know her. I've known her all my life, but I'm only just meeting her now.
It's a similar feeling for me.
Yeah. So I wanted to just say thank you. I am truly honoured to have this opportunity to talk to you about both of your books.
The first one, Born Confused, and the sequel, Bombay Blues, which I absolutely love as well. So
for me, it holds a very special place in my heart. This is such a nice thing for me because
I read your book when I was, 12 years old, and
it's been almost 20 years that I've wanted to have a chat with you, and I started crying. I was like, I'm going to fangirl, and it means so much to me. So I thought, let me say it now. I'm going to say it again, but in case I just accidentally cry.
I'm really good at crying, so if any tears roll down, it's not...
You're making me teary-eyed now as well. Like, I'm just picturing that moment all those years ago, what you were doing, what I was doing, and not realizing that, we met on the page and we'd one day be able to meet like this, and one day we'll be able to meet in person as well.
Oh, yeah.
When the pandemic is behind us. No, I am too.
No, it was so nice to me. It was that realization of, for so long I'll say this, but I remember when I was 12 years old thinking, I'd love to just have a chat with Tanuja, just have a chat. I wonder what she's like, and I want her to know how connected I felt to this book on so many different levels. And look, 20 years later.
Yeah, it's amazing. And now I'm thinking too, well, this will happen for the future. But for 17 years, I was living in the UK, and I finally got to go to Manchester, which had been kind of a fantasy. Maybe it was 2016, and I just loved it. I felt like, oh my God, this is a place where I could live. It just felt so at home and so exciting and inspiring, and to think you were somewhere around there when we were walking around the streets in 2016. We must have exchanged some good vibes towards each other,
Honestly, I really think so. So
very, very, very moving for me. Thank you for sharing that. That just means the world. And this kind of connection, it's so special. It feels like this is what the whole point of writing is about, right? To make that kind of connection, like a heart connection.
Massively.
So. Born Confused was released. It was 2002. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
So I was 12 years old, and I remember this was the first book I read, and I'm sure you get this comment so many times, but it was the first book I came across and I read that had a very strong South Asian identity and representation.
I remember feeling so connected to the book on so many different levels, even the language and the way it's written, Little things like that just made me more connected to it.
And especially the front cover, I thought, an Indian girl with a bindi on, this is my kind of thing,
And so I instantly connected to the book, and I remember thinking, at the age of 12, I'd love to have a chat with the author. I'd love to just speak to Tanuja and see what she's like and where these ideas came from and how the story developed. And at the time, obviously, there wasn't any internet, so I just know that it had such a strong impact on me and on my life. And I'm very grateful that 20 years later, I'm here having a talk with you about your books. And I'm grateful that the universe brought us together. And more importantly, I'm grateful to you for writing both of these books, because they allowed me to not only accept myself, but also my identity, my culture, my heritage, which I think I struggled with growing up, because I was the only brown girl in both primary school and high school. So your book, particularly Born Confused, really allowed me to accept my authentic self. So thank you for your talents and for bringing this book to life for so many of us.
I have to say thank you. I'm so honored that you reached out. I'm so honored that Dimple Lala and I, got to share your path in this way. And I have to thank you, because it's, your love and your care and your looking out for Dimple that that has allowed the story to thrive and survive, and that has brought us together. And that's the best part about sharing our stories, is we discover we're not alone, and we make truly meaningful connections with people we may never meet. Luckily, we're getting to meet this way, and we are going to meet one of these days in Maine and in Manchester once the pandemic's behind us. But it's a beautiful feeling. You meet on the page, and once a book goes out into the world, it's really a collaboration between the reader and the author. So we're a team in Dimple's journey, because you bring your life story and you bring your heart and soul and your experiences to your interpretation of that story, as I did in the writing of it. And both sides of the equation are equally important. So I thank you so much for being part of Dimple's life, as you've allowed us to be part of yours.
Oh, that's so lovely. Dimple Lala is a character, I feel like she's so real. I feel like she's going to live forever and ever, especially because Born Confused is a book which was
almost like a pioneering element for Asians. It was a book which really set the standards and set the tone, and this book was the beginning of everybody else's. I feel personally, anyway, that this book was the one.
It was the leader of all Indian books, all South Asian books.
And Dimple Lala is she is my favourite character, to be honest. But what sparked your books?
And their protagonist, Dimple Lala.
So I think, the short answer, I always have a longer answer, as you can tell from the length of the books, but the short answer is it was to choose my own heroes, and to make those heroes people that more closely reflected the heroes in my own home, in our family, and also to reflect the wonderful, creative, exuberant, pioneering South Asian people that I met when I moved to New York later as well. So sort of to reflect my home life growing up in Western Massachusetts, and then to honor the second generation diaspora South Asian scene that I became very intrinsically a part of later. And, they always say, or some say, you should write what you know. And I think ultimately that's what I ended up doing with these books, although it took me such a long time to know that I knew anything at all. And I have no doubt that is very linked to the fact that there were very few windows and mirrors in terms of representation of this kind of story, and these kind of people of the South Asian diaspora, the Indian diaspora, in the U.S. for Dimple Lala, and I think that's why it took a very long time for me to start to realize that this identity. I always thought I'm not Indian enough in India. I'm not American enough in America, and it was really like a feeling of being neither here nor there in terms of culture. And the journey for me, and Dimple Lala, helped me a lot on this journey, was towards realizing that neither here nor there space is in fact a you are here, and a hyphenated identity is a viable identity, and you're not like half of one thing and half of the other. You can be 100% both. You can be whole. And that hyphen doesn't have to be a border. It can be a bridge, and you can connect those parts, you know. That was a long process for me, though, because growing up when I did in Western Massachusetts, my parents, first of all, were the first to immigrate from both sides of the family. My father's from Gujarat. He was born in Johannesburg in South Africa. My mother's from Bombay, born and raised. And they met in medical school in Bombay. They had a semi-scandalous out-of-caste love marriage.
Yeah.
It was sort of easier for my mother's side of the family to accept. They were in Bombay, they were in the city, and had seen a little more breaking of the rules. Ultimately, they got the blessing of my father's village. And then, so they broke the rules there, and then they were the first to immigrate to the States from both sides of the family. And then we were the first of our particular kind of brown in the town that I grew up in. And there was nobody at that time either, like, you know, we weren't represented at all on TV, in the pages of magazines, on the movie screens, on our street, certainly not on the bookshelf. And I think that's why all those years later, I wanted to fill that hole on my childhood bookshelf with Dimple Lala, with a character like that. And something I realized later too, which still kind of amazes me, is not only were we not visible in all of those places, we weren't even visible in my own imagination to me. So even when I would draw pictures and write short stories and write poems and you know, all kinds of, I would daydream about stories. I was a bookworm from when I was very little, but never even in my own imagination did I picture heroes and protagonists with brown skin, and certainly not of, you know, Indian background and all. So it really goes to show what a difference it makes to see yourself reflected in the culture at large, like what it does really on a deeper level. That was the long answer.
I love long answers. Go for it. I'm also a long answer kind of girl, as you can tell.
And for you, so when you grew up, what was it like for you? Did you grow up in Manchester?
Yeah, so born and bred in Manchester, still here, never moved away. I'm such a home girl. Yeah, Manchester's so deep in me. You know, I was the only Indian brown girl in school, both primary school and secondary school, actually in college as well. So up until the age of 18, I was the kind of like the only one, or there'd be another mixed race girl, or I was normally the only Indian girl.
I experienced a lot of racism, still do now actually. And it was very difficult for me to find my place.
And very much like Dimple, I felt like when I went to India, it was so Indian. And I was like, whoa. But being in the UK, I was like, well, I'm too Indian. I'm way too Indian here. Even when I went to university, I studied performing arts. And it was a course which is, well, it's a course which is very non-conventional. I'm not a stereotypical Indian who's become a doctor or an accountant. And again, you know, at uni, I was the only I was very isolated as an individual, I think.
It took me a long time to accept myself and to be open about who I am, you know? I never mentioned that I do Bharatanatyam dancing or Bollywood dancing. I never mentioned that anything about Diwali.
And it was only really until when I went to uni, accidentally started modelling, was in the magazines, getting my pictures taken, and at that time social media had just started, so I was posting my pictures and people would say to me, you look really pretty, and I'm like, oh, thanks, like we just wear this all the time. And they're like, no, you look, it suits you, you look nice. I was like, oh, okay.
And it actually took somebody else who wasn't Indian, who wasn't Asian, to say that I looked nice for me to accept my own culture, which is a shame, really.
But I think that's all part and parcel of being Asian and being brought up in a different country. I think what Dimple goes through, what you went through, what I went through, it's I think so many
South Asians go through that, especially females. Yeah.
So I'm so sorry to hear about the racism and that it, you know, continues to this day. It's systemic, as we've all seen, right? It's so deeply embedded in so many cultures.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful to know that you've reached that point of self-love and self-acceptance, because if we don't have that, you know, undoing systemic racism and going forward and feeling like we have the right to take up space in the world and in culture, and we can make space for each other, and we have the right to take up space. It's so important.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too as well, because I didn't remain the only brown South Asian person as I was growing up. There was another boy in my school later, and then there was actually a girl who moved from India to the US when I was maybe 12 or 13. And I remember we were playing on the monkey bars. My parents said, go, make her feel welcome because they're new to the country and new to the town and all. And at some point when we were playing, she said something about, she couldn't relate to me because she said, "You're not Indian enough." And that also felt like, wow, this is, now we're in America. And I'm hearing that in the playground in America on the monkey bars of my school. And I have to thank her all these years later, because I feel like those little wounds ended up, becoming sparks that fueled this writing process. And it's so interesting. It's just, I also look back to my childhood and I think, there's so many Halloweens. There were at least 3 Halloweens where I dressed up as an Indian girl for Halloween. So that whole, I dressed in like a little sari that our relatives in India had sent back to me for Diwali, which we didn't actually really celebrate with my immediate family in our house in Wilbraham. But we did celebrate Halloween because candy. But had I known Diwali involved so much sugar, I probably would have made more of a push for it. Yeah. Have you found with, in terms of the racism and all, do you feel like is it sort of since the political events of the last few years, kind of Brexit and different things that have gone on, has it just been ongoing? Has there been a change it's like the tone that's been set politically?
It's been a variety of things and a mixture of factors, I think. I remember when I was 18 years old, I was teaching a Bollywood dance class. Now, this dance class were meant to be having a line dancing lesson, and the line dancing teacher wasn't available. She said, "Ria, can you go in? Can you teach? They'll love it. They'll love it. Teach them a little bit of Bollywood." I was like, "Of course I will."
And I remember one lady was like, "I'm not learning that." She went, "All that Indian dancing, I'm not doing that." And they all kind of started chipping in like that. And I, the sensitive me that I am, I started crying. I was like, "I'm just gonna go."
And it was the judgment that they put on, and without even trying, and then they all kind of ganged up on me.
Recently, I've been experiencing it within the acting field. I say recently, for about 2.5 years, I've had more indirect racism. The comments that were made, me being treated very differently. So only recently have I taken myself out of the situation, because it was something that was very hard for me to deal with, and it all just became a little bit too much for me. I think there's 2 extremes of people who want to be so involved in the culture and want to learn, and the people who don't really have an awareness of what it is, and they just judge you for somebody who you're not because they think you're something else.
Yeah, and it's fear-based, right? Fear of the unknown, or fear of being left out. But then unfortunately, if you kind of succumb to the baser instincts of lashing out and at people, and rather than dealing with why you feel uncomfortable and why you're so insecure in the presence of something that might be a little different than what you're used to at home, it's a very difficult thing. Is that your father?
Yeah.
Please say hello from me.
Hello. How are you?
It's so lovely to meet you, and thank you for creating this wonderful woman.
Oh.
It's wonderful to meet you.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've told my dad all about you, and so actually we're gonna move on to later on. There's a question here about lots of references to Indian astrology in your books.
And destiny being written, and it's all in the stars. As my dad's here, I'll just tell you now because he's here.
My dad is an astrologer.
Oh, really? Oh,
That's not
multi-talented family.
that's not my full-time job. That's not my full-time job, but I do.
Okay, oh, that's wonderful. Very interesting. Are there a lot of readings happening quite regularly, just naturally at home?
Mainly from me.
Every day. That.
Not every day, maybe every 2 days. So when I read Born Confused and Bombay Blues,
there was Vedic astrology references, and I was like, oh, I remember being so young, I was like, oh my God, Dad, you talk about horoscopes. This is what you do.
So tell me, Tanuja, do you believe in astrology?
I definitely believe there's something to astrology. I don't know much about it, and I don't know much about it from the somebody like your father, who I'm sure really knows kind of the science and art of it. My experience of astrology was growing up and reading, the horoscope in like the local paper on the weekend kind of thing. But I loved reading the horoscope. I loved reading horoscopes. I loved reading about star signs. And I have found over the years that, there do seem to be quite a few commonalities in star signs when I meet when I meet Aries or Sagittarius, whatever sign it might be. There is some kind of thread that feels like it's connecting these things. And I love the whole idea of everything being written. And I feel like for example, meeting you and how we talked about this sense that we already know each other. I feel like that feeling also, like when you have that kind of deja vu sort of moment, I feel like that's a little glimmer of this was already written into our stories. And maybe we haven't technically met until today, but by having that written in your story your whole life long, there's already something in you that's there, that's part of this moment. And when the moment happens, you recognize that part that you've been carrying with you through the whole journey. And I love moments like these are just, magical and beautiful. And I'm so grateful when this kind of thing happens and you just feel like you're part of a greater story and a wonderful small moment and story as well. Yeah. And I think, in terms of written in the stars, my parents have always said too, that it's already written, but you have to do your best still. So it may already be written, but it doesn't mean you can sort of sit back and be like, all right, I'm going to sit this one out because everything's going to happen anyways. Yeah. That balance again of having to give it your all and do your best to make the decisions that make sense, like to live your life in a certain way. And then, ultimately, if things don't work out in a way that you expected, or if you're dealing with something difficult, thinking that it was written can also be a way to help you get through it. Yeah. And then there's also this idea that's tied in. The character of Zara in both books, but in Born Confused, Zara talks about amor fati. And I may be misinterpreting this whole kind of philosophy, this concept, but amor fati means loving what is necessary. And I love that idea too, because it feels like it's tied into our fates being written in the stars, and you love what is written. And then the idea of loving what is necessary too, I feel like there's also a sense of the necessity of having to kind of work towards your own story. And part of what we've been talking about today, it feels like it is about that. It's sort of like we do have our stories. They are written, but we continue to write them. And we continue to write ourselves into them and write ourselves closer to our truths through whatever process that might be. It might be through a friendship, through dance, through all of these things. So yeah, but I do like that idea. I like that idea when you look up at the sky where we can see stars now because we're not in a city now. And just thinking about how all of this whole system is all tied together and how we're spinning in space and we're so tiny, yet we're so epic, and we're connected. We are literally made of stardust. Yes. So we have to be connected to what we see out there because it's literally like in our bones and our blood as well. And I do feel our meeting has been in our blood and our bones for many, many years now too.
So should we talk about Dimple?
So Dimple is a photographer. I love how she calls her camera Chiquitica. I think it's so cute to give it a name. It's almost like a best friend, isn't it?
Can you talk about what her photography and her camera mean to her? Because I know they mean so much to her, but on a deeper level.
Yes, absolutely. So Chica Chica is the camera that Dimple's grandfather gifts to her, and her grandfather um, didn't speak English, so they would use pictures to talk. So that camera is a gift from him, and in part he's the first to recognize that she has a gift for photography and a passion for photography, even when she's quite young. So that's also his being tuned into her, even though he's so many miles away and a language away. And so it's partly about that connection. And then it's a way that the two of them can continue to communicate. And he always understands, you know, what the empty space in the photo means, as well as what's in the frame, what's not in the frame. And that was based on inspired by my relationship with my own grandfather. My grandfather spoke English, my mother's father, in Bombay, but we had a really very active back and forth on that pale blue airmail stationery, those letters. Like when I was a child, when I was growing up, even later, my family in India, nobody had a phone, and of course there was no email, there was no WhatsApp, there was none of that, and we would write on those like kind of triple fold pale blue airmail stationery sheets, and I would go every day to the mailbox waiting for a reply. He was kind of doing the same over there. Sometimes it would take, you know, a month for the letters to cross. And there was a section in that stationery where it was called additional message space, and I would always draw pictures there, and I would draw my brother and my parents and me, or, you know, our Alaskan Malamute. We had a dog when I was growing up. I'd just do a drawing of something from my day and send it to him, and he would often give me like a special little message in that part of the stationery as well. And so we didn't just use pictures to talk, but that was kind of the memory in mind when I was, you know, developing this relationship for Dimple. And for Dimple, I mean, you said very aptly that the camera is kind of her best friend, and it is in a lot of ways. And so Chica being girl, and Chica like kind of the third eye, her camera is her way of seeing things that may not be so visible to, you know, in the real world, or like the world that everybody is sharing or other people are seeing. And Dimple starts out in Born Confused as a person who kind of hides behind her camera and uses it to spy onto a world that she feels that she will never fit into. And she's kind of, you know, feels like she's on the sidelines and just watching while other people are, you know, fitting in and living their lives, etc. And then over time, she starts to realize that there's no such thing as even passive watching. And all along, you know, simply by choosing the frame, choosing who to shine the light on, who to bring into focus, she's been an active part of the shaping of her own story all along. And that's a process for her. In terms of the photos, she moves from using just black and white film to starting to understand shades of gray in her life as well as in photography. And then by the end of the book, she's using color. And she begins to basically like own and inhabit her own identity. So the camera is kind of her connection to her past and her ancestry and her family and all, and her grandfather, he symbolizes all of that. It's her way of kind of managing and dealing with and ultimately shaping her present moment. And then it ends up being kind of key to her future. She starts to see a place for her in the story through the camera. And then in the sequel, in Bombay Blues, Dimple goes to Bombay for her cousin Sangeeta's wedding, and the book is partly about that, but it's mostly not about the wedding. It's mostly about Dimple's journey there. And she thinks that her photography project there, she's at NYU for school now, for university, and she's trying to figure out a final project for school, for uni. And she thinks she's going to go there and photograph all the different browns of India. So in terms of, you know, sort of metaphor for the diversity of South Asian culture itself and Indian culture itself, and the different skin tones, but also like the sand and the rust and you know, the different browns one sees in Bombay. And when she gets there, as happened to me, the color blue starts to really be the one that she's drawn to. And she, her eye falls upon the, you know, the tarp rooftops, and the fishing boat bellies and the blue skin gods. And then she begins to just follow the color, and her modus operandi becomes, let's just follow this color all the way through and see where it will lead to. And the book is about the blues, the color blue, but also the blues in terms of mood and melancholy, and in terms of music, and in terms of the wild blue yonder. So that's kind of her process with her camera in that book. And in book 3, which I'm just, kind of in the beginning phases of, she's with her camera. I mean, in Bombay Blues, she has Chica Tika, but she also has a digital camera.
Yeah.
And in book 3, she's working with both cameras as well. And on her personal journey, she's kind of widening and deepening her lens more with an eye towards intersectionality and living a more generous experience of diversity and inclusivity to kind of reach a hand out to other people of color as well. Not just Asian people of color, but kind of intersecting, in terms of Black Lives Matter and other communities.
That's so exciting. And firstly, there's a book 3. Oh my God, yes. I like how we're seeing her journey develop.
Maybe, Tanuja, I've got an idea. Maybe in book 3, she can take some pictures on her mobile, because
it's a modern Dimple.
You're right. She hasn't done that yet. And with Bombay Blues, yeah, she has a digital camera, but not a phone. She doesn't take pictures on her phone. So that's, yeah, definitely a good point. And it's kind of like Chica Tika is always there, but I also felt like, with Bombay Blues, logistically for the book also, she couldn't really be carrying a single lens reflex into every situation and, be able to like kind of photograph things in a sometimes clandestine manner. But the phone is a great idea.
yeah.
So it's kind of, she keeps moving forward with the times, but she's definitely a character who's very connected to the past and sort of past media as well. And Kirsch, is that kind of connection is paralleled in the fact that he's a DJ who loves physical records and albums. So even though he also uses digital for music, that's the real passion, is like actually, holding a long play record and being able to feel the music that way, literally in your hands.
Yeah.
Is it possible for me to be Dimple?
Oh, well, perhaps it is. We can do a
pressure.
little research excursion together. Well, you are already Dimple, and Dimple is already you on like a, soul level, connection level.
Oh, definitely.
We were talking about Dimple's photography. Before I forget, I would love to know.
I've always wondered about this picture in Born Confused.
Ah, yes.
I'm going to
So
show
I have it here, you have the UK version of the book.
Yeah.
That photo is it's a self-portrait my mother took in the mirror in India when I think some friends loaned my mother, my parents, their camera, and they were playing around with the camera because not everybody had access to a camera, or now most of us have them on our smartphones. Interesting with this photo, I saw it for years and years and years. You know how you see family photos when you're just growing up, you go through boxes now and then, you get very used to them. I never realized it was a self-portrait until I was writing Born Confused, and there's a chapter towards the end of Born Confused where Dimple starts spending a lot of time at home and is really connecting on a different level with her parents, and she starts going through old family photographs. And then I did that. I was sort of acting out Dimple, which I did for some of the scenes in that sense. And I came across this photo because I was thinking, I'll use our actual photographs and describe some things from family history and anecdote and all. And with Dimple in my mind, when I looked at this photograph for the billionth time, I finally saw what was right before my eyes all along, which is obviously a self-portrait. And you see the text is flipped because it's a portrait in a mirror, a self-portrait my mother was taking in the mirror.
So it's basically, it's a selfie, isn't it? Your mum took a selfie.
Yes, yes, he took a selfie back in the day. And I just thought that's so funny. I thought I knew that photo, but I didn't really see until I really sat down and gave it that time and attention. And then I just started wondering, what that day that my mother took this self-portrait in the mirror, what had the rest of her day been like? And what happened during that day? What did she eat for breakfast? What conversations did she have? What was she thinking? What future was she imagining for herself? What dreams and aspirations? What hurts? What happiness is? All of those things. And I just spent quite a bit of time just looking at that photo. And then it's a strange feeling too, because, you know, she's looking straight out at me and I'm looking straight at her. And I was just thinking in that moment, like, did she have a glimmer of a sense that one day she'd be living in Western Massachusetts, so many miles away from Bombay, and years after that, have these kids, American born, and for me, my brother was born in Bombay, but American kids raised in the U.S. And I don't know, it was very, very kind of moving looking back at my mother's younger self, and then, I myself was kind of thinking about my own dreams and aspirations and working on this book, and then just thinking about my mom's. And so that photo, Dimple ends up describing that particular photo in that chapter. And the book came out in September. Both books came out in September, actually. And my parents, for years, because they knew I wanted to write, and I just was always feeling like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to write a book, and do I have anything worth saying, and can I do this? And I was so racked with self-doubt. My parents, and my brother as well, actually never had the doubt that I had. They had more faith in me than I had in myself. And every year, my parents, around their birthdays, actually my mother, father, and brother are all born in September, and they would say, don't do anything, just write something for it. Like, write a page. If you can't write a page, write a paragraph, write a sentence. And that's the only birthday present we want, is we want you to do what you want to do and write something, and that will be our present. And then by chance, by destiny, by fate, by written in the starsness, these books came out like right around their birthdays. In fact, I think one of them came out actually on my mother's birthday, and that's completely scholastic, deciding the publication schedule. So I told my editor, they were amazing, Scholastic, and I just said, can we get this photograph in there? Because this is actually, more than anything, this is a gift for my parents, and telling this story, more than anything, it was my way of trying to honor the story that they created, for themselves and also for us. Mm-hmm. And so they put the photograph in, and I think in the dedication, I think it says happy birthday to them. And then with Bombay Blues, they included my parents' wedding photo. Yeah. And that, again, it came out, at their birthdays. And their wedding was in Bombay, and Bombay is the city of their courtship. Bombay Blues, that the plot line may, not include this in particularly the same way, but for me, a real catalyst for my wanting to go to Bombay and set the book there was my desire to know this city that meant so much to the people who mean so much to me, where I had basically never lived. I had been there as a baby for like a year or two. And it was just wanting to have some connection to this place that was so meaningful for my parents and my brother. And then as well to find my own connection with the city. And that's, kind of what Dimple does in her own way.
Yeah. So I've just had another idea as you were talking. You're going to be like, this girl's crazy. For your third book. So as well as Dimple using her phone to take pictures, for the third book, the photo at the beginning of the book, perhaps it can be a selfie of you.
You're very lovely.
And it's a nice little journey, I think.
Wow, journey through the photographs.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. Thank you for caring and having these ideas about the third book. So I know I have one reader.
Do you know what? Sometimes when we're talking, I just get these ideas, and it happens to me often, and I just have to say it in the moment. What I really liked about Dimple's photography and the connection with her photography and camera, as well as her granddad, reminds me of the relationship I had with my nana, because
he couldn't talk very good English, and but we still had a laugh. Our connection was my dancing. He was so proud that I am a dancer, that I was on stage every weekend performing, and
he'd tell everybody, but my granddaughter, she's a dancer and she dances on stage. And he could not be more proud of me.
And I remember before he passed away,
all he wanted was to see me on TV. That was one of his one of his dreams. And 2 weeks after he died, I got my first TV job.
And I just thought, oh, you know, like that's how life is, right? That's how it works.
So now everything I do, I always have him in my mind, because although there's a lot of people who aren't very accepting of my job and, you know, the unconventional nature of what I do, my nana was my biggest fan. So everything I do is always with him in mind, and to make him extra proud, because I know how proud he was of me anyway. Yeah.
I'm sure he was with you in that job.
Yeah.
Whether he was physically with you or not, I mean, he's in here, and that's just beautiful. You're kind of, you know, carrying on his spirit, keeping his spirit alive and that flame burning in your own life. That's beautiful. The dance also, because that, you know, Dimple has that connection with her camera and all, and it's sort of her way into her own culture. With the dance you do, like how has that played a role in terms of your own relationship with your culture and identity?
Yeah, I feel like I've gone from not knowing who I was, not being too sure on the Indianness of me, to being so Indian that everything I do now for work, whether it's dancing, acting or modelling or presenting a show,
it all incorporates me and my identity, my culture, and I can't be any more Indian than I already am now, you know. I don't think I could be more religious than I am now. Things have really changed for me, and I think it took a few life experiences for me to really find my path and my journey, and
to find myself as well as my religion. I think it took a little bit of time.
But in terms of dance, you know, the majority of dancing that I personally do, we have lots of different styles at the Academy, but I do Bharatanatyam and Bollywood dancing. It's this sense of, as well as having such a strong connection to my culture and my heritage,
it's this sense of when you're so creative and you're so passionate about what you do, you almost fall into this deep sense of mindfulness, that time runs away with you and you're in your own world, your own bubble, and it's almost like you feel this deep elevation and creative freedom.
No one can pop that bubble because it's your little world, and it really it's almost like a bubble that's just hugging me, and I'm just you know, next to the bubble, and I'm okay in my own little world.
So yeah, a very deep connection with dance, which in turn is a connection to my culture. But I never realised that until recently.
It takes time, doesn't it? Sometimes for humans to register differently.
It seems like it should be so easy being who we are and knowing who we are, and it's just it's an ongoing journey, right? It's just we never stop. I think also, like, you know, why young adult stories and coming of age stories, I think that's a reason that they can be so powerful and relatable, because no matter our age, we never stop coming of age. You know, we may think at some point in our youth that, oh, we'll figure it all out when we, you know, go to college, or we'll figure it all out when we get our first job and all, but it's a continuing dance.
It is.
So it's good you're so good at dancing, because you need to be able to kind of have that flow and rigor and surrender and control, like that, all that balancing. That's sort of the life's great work, right?
Yeah, and I don't think success is a destination. I don't think happiness is a destination, and the same with, you know, finding who you are. And in both books, you know, Born Confused and Bombay Blues,
there's a search for identity and who Dimple is. And, you know, especially with Dimple's mum, when after so many years, you know, she gets out her Bharatanatyam bells, and you never really stop searching for yourself, and that's forever changing and evolving, I think, and that's really present, especially with Dimple's mum.
So, which characters do you connect with the most, and what inspired them?
the most obvious answer, I guess, would be Dimple, because the books are written first person from her perspective, but it does feel a little bit like picking a favorite child, you know. So I, I feel like I love them all equally, and that love is, you know, with their flaws, and that love kind of is expressed through not idolizing them or anything, but just wanting to know what happens to them, and how they're going through their lives. And I think in the writing process, you have to find a connection and find like a mini obsession with any character, however minor or major, just to be able to, you know, access, just to kind of fuel that determination to get to know them and to do justice to them, whatever their personality may be like, you know. And Dimple, so the plot line is fictitious, but I drew from my own experiences growing up in Wilbraham, Massachusetts, and later in New York, for her story. And the town that she lives in, it's Springfield, New Jersey, and I grew up in near Springfield, Massachusetts. So I put her in Springfield, New Jersey as a nod to Springfield, Massachusetts, and also to keep her closer to New York, so I could get her into New York for all those other adventures. Her street is, and Gwyn Street, that's based on the layout of my childhood street. Although I named the street, I think it's Gwyn Street, that's named Lancaster Road, but Lancaster Road is actually the street. When I wrote Born Confused, we were living in a flat on Portobello Road, right above the fruit and vegetable market, next to the Tesco, across the street from Intoxica Records, and I wrote the whole book in kind of like cafes and all around that area, and then, you know, at this desk sitting in the window looking down on Portobello Road. And then we were on the stretch of Portobello Road between Westbourne Park Road and Lancaster Road. So Lancaster Road became Gwyn's Street, even though it's in London, and Gwyn is in New Jersey. And then the diner scene with the father, that's based on Friendly's. Friendly's is in the US, it's kind of more on the East Coast US. That's a kind of ice cream diner chain, and it was founded in the town where I grew up. So that's sort of a nod to that. And the pond, Mirror Lake, it's Bennett Pond in the town where I grew up. The layout of the high school is the same as my high school, Minnechaug Regional High School. So that's sort of where those settings came from. The parents' backstory, the Lalas in the book, that's the only part that is fact. So the whole backstory of their falling in love and their unarranged marriage, and the story of like the village elder coming to Bombay with a girl from the village and trying to lure my father back on the quote right course. All of that is based on truth and their backstory. Their first kiss was at Breach Candy. That's also true. But the plot line itself is fictitious. So like my parents never tried to set me up with a suitable boy. Even though I think at one point I did ask them, like, could you just set me up with someone during a particularly dry spell when I was living in New York and you know, running around and loving the city, but not like meeting anyone in a meaningful way. I think I might have even asked them, but they never actually did that. In terms of the other characters, Gwyn she's part imagination, she's part amalgam of many Gwyns I've had in my life.
Yeah, we've all had a few Gwyns, haven't we? As Indian girls, we've all had a few.
So yeah, I mean, the Gwyns that I've had, actually none of them ever tried to like steal the Indian boy from me, but also I wasn't with any Indian boy to steal. So like, it's kind of, I wasn't looking for one, I wasn't with one, I wasn't really with, you know, anybody for like big periods of time. So so I did have kind of, you know, people who inspired different parts of Gwyn's personality in you know, friends I had from childhood up to, you know, the present moment of writing Born Confused, that present day. And another muse for Gwyn was Gwen Stefani from the band No Doubt. And yeah, so Gwen Stefani, and this is like kind of the period, when I was writing, it was like just after they did Tragic Kingdom and they had their big hit Don't Speak, and she was wearing a bindi. And, you know, Tony Kanal, the bass player in the band, is South Asian American. He's of Indian origin. And so that was a kind of a person I sort of had in mind visually when I was writing, you know, Small Town Gwen. I was sort of picturing rock star Gwen. And that was also partly because, Gwen Stefani and Gwyn, she's also like kind of representing this dynamic in that in the late 90s moment when I was in New York, I fell into and became part of the South Asian second generation diaspora scene that I was talking about earlier. And it was an absolutely amazing moment when South Asian culture was sort of reaching critical mass and momentum. And 1997, DJ Rekha's Basement Bhangra Party started. It started literally in a basement initially, and that party lasted 20 years with a huge blowout in Central Park. There were like South Asian Studies departments appearing in places where there hadn't been any. The South Asian Journalists Association, the South Asian Lesbian and Gay Alliance. Over in the UK, the whole Asian Underground movement and Anoka and that amazing music scene, sort of the sister scene, was flourishing there, or the sister and parent scene, because so much of this came through the UK first before it got to the States. And for me, it was the first time I made a short film in the 90s, in the late 90s in New York, and it had an Indian American protagonist, and it screened in some festivals, and literally overnight, I suddenly met all these South Asian people of my generation who were interested in the arts, who wanted to act and direct and write screenplays and write fiction and, sculpt and all. And it was an amazing moment. I had never had that in my life. And the parties and the debates about appropriation, all of this was very intertwined, like the creating, the partying, the eating in the diner at midnight, the NYU like discussion about who has the right to a culture, like all of this was part of the same scene, and it was the same people. You'd see the same people, at the debate talking about identity politics that you'd see throwing it down at Basement Bhangra on the dance floor. And at the same time, you had Gwen Stefani with the bindi. You had Madonna's Ray of Light album, and she was like in her yoga phase. And mainstream culture was adopting so many elements of South Asian culture. Some would argue they were co-opting it. And then this kind of clash, this intersect and clash of these two forces, like South Asian culture coming of age and getting critical mass momentum, and mainstream culture, holding on to elements of South Asian culture. That was just really fascinating. And it just made me start thinking things like, how come, when Gwen Stefani puts on a bindi, or when a white woman or girl puts on a bindi, it looks really cool and edgy and funky. But, if I do it, somebody will say, were you at a wedding? Or did you just come back from, and the character of Gwyn became sort of emblematic of that force. So Gwyn and Dimple are sort of those two cultural moments also kind of coming together and clashing. Yeah. So that was the inspiration for Gwyn. And she's, there are a lot of readers who are very upset at Gwyn. I'd love to hear your take on her. Like they get just very upset at, things that happen with her and Dimple and with Kirsch and all. But Gwyn, and that's part of the process, as I was saying earlier, to write a character, you have to also be able to connect with the character. And I think there's quite a bit of me in Gwyn too. Again, not really in terms of how she grows up and her background, but, the running out onto the dance floor and being the first person on the dance floor because the music just takes you over, like those sorts of things I have in common with Gwyn. Yeah. So there's some of me in her, which is like how I can access her. And then with all the characters, I think there's some of you in them, which allows you the entry, but then they start to take on lives of their own and start showing you who they are and start kind of leading the narrative and leading you in sometimes surprising directions.
We all have a Gwyn friend through different stages of our lives, I think. So I had a Gwyn in primary school. I had a few Gwyns actually in secondary school as I was growing up. That remained in college. And then my Gwyns turned into boys as I was in uni because a lot of my friends just were all male. But like yourself, I didn't have a Gwyn who tried to take my Indian guy because I wasn't with anybody.
All of my Gwyns, or the majority of them, have always been, at that time, more Indian than me. And, I remember one particular Gwyn, she came over for a sleepover, and we must have been about 9, 10. And she was like, I want to wear one of your Indian clothes. So my mum, being my mum, got out all of my lingas and everything that I owned. And we had just a dress up session. And she was she was loving it. She was totally in her element,
Bindis, bangles, jewelry, bling bling.
and I was like, wow.
It took that for me to go, oh, I look okay in this. And I was like, Mum, put bindi on me. Like, Mommy.
In that moment, you're like, hello, I'm here, I'm Indian. Why are you giving me all the attention? I want to wear that linga. Mum was like, you could have worn it at the last wedding. I was like, yeah, but I'm going to wear it now because she's got it on. I think we all have that Gwyn friend, and I think that leads on to Dimple's relationship with her parents very much reminds me of my relationship with my parents, and I see my mum and dad as the three musketeers, like a really cute family, and that is that's also represented in Born Confused. And I just think when I first read this, even now I'm like, this book is just, how did you know? Was this written like for me? Like, how did you know, Tanuja? All these connections. But no, I think Dimple and her relationship with her parents do remind me of me and my parents, and those traditions, those family generational traditions that we take forward. And which do become more important, I think, as we grow older. I think as we're younger, we're just like, whatever. But now, if my mum gave a dubba to another girl, I'd be like, what are you doing? So the dubba reference I absolutely love, because we've all got, that steel dubba with the different masalas in it. You open it, it's like a waft of ujmo, and you're like this. My mouth is watering just thinking about it.
No, I know, me too. Just thinking about it.
But it's such a beautiful element in the book which really stuck with me, and it's a beautiful connection between a mother and her daughter. So could you talk about Dimple's relationship with her parents and that sharing of heritage and culture and identity?
Yeah, I think the that's definitely part of it. And in that particular scene, her mom is looking out for her in more ways than she can even know when it's the Queen's chicken cooking moment. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that these items that they just look like things, just like that photograph that I loved, but I didn't really pay attention to it being a self-portrait, the one of my mother. They just kind of are, things that surround you as you're growing up, and you kind of stop seeing them. And then when you do get older and you start to know what the stories are behind these objects, they start to turn into nothing less than talismans. They feel very magical and alchemical. Like, when you touch the dabba, you're touching all the hands of all the mothers and grandmothers, perhaps grandfathers as well, if they were in the kitchen ever, but all the people who kind of, it's likely possible, but all of the people whose hands are sort of relaying this to you in this particular moment. And I think once Dimple starts to, see her parents as full human beings, and it often takes a while to start seeing your parents as people who had lives before you, when she starts to see them. I know, right? What could possibly have been happening before I was here? But when she starts to see them as human beings who were once young, who were once children, and then were young adults as well, with their own dreams of their, for different futures, their own aspirations, their own heartaches, and when she starts to kind of see them in a more whole way, that way, I think these items start to mean more to her. And one more thing on the dabba, like, I barely can cook. I mean, I make a few good things now and then, like once a year maybe. So I do have the dabba, but my dabba at the moment is storing my earrings.
Wow.
I have like a little one of the bowls has like some rings in it, like some hair clips in it, and some earrings in it. But my mom is like, she's a killer cook.
Yeah.
So she amazing cook. Then, my God, like later in life when I moved away from home, I thought, what was I doing? If I could only take all those meals I had no interest in at the time, and just fill my fridge and my stomach and my.
I'm very much like you. Like, I can't cook. I mean, no, I can't. I was going to try and defend myself, and I'm like, what's the point, Mira? You can't cook. Even now, like, I'm only 32, and I can't. I mean, I can make rutli. They're
That's
round
good.
and they puff up as well, but I'm not
Yeah.
like, I need assistance. I've just never had an interest in food or cooking or eating actually.
Yes.
So now I'm at the point where I'm like, oh my God, like I should try. And so I've been experimenting over the past few months. I don't want to, can't jump in too deep. One thing at a time. Thipla is the fashion at the moment in my kitchen.
Oh, my parents have been craving thepla, and I don't know how you make it. And here in Maine, there's only one grocery that sells Indian food in the whole state of Maine, and that's taken some getting used to. Like after 17 years in the UK, where you just go to Tesco and you can get, you get the stuff my mother had to drive 2 hours to get when I was a child. But they don't have thepla, but we are gonna make an outing there and just like stock up a bunch of things too. But are you learning from your parents? Or are you following like recipes, or how are you
Yes, mum and nanny's
experimenting?
recipe. Yeah, mum and nanny's
Oh,
recipe. So I will send you my thipla recipe. I say mine, like I've taken over my mum's thipla recipe. If I can do it,
yes.
you can do it.
Okay. No, this will be wonderful. And you're so right. It's not, you can get amazing Indian food in some places, but there's nothing comparable to the family recipes. There's always, I mean, there's also obviously the special ingredient of that particular kind of love that goes into the
Just about to
cooking,
say love is the
right?
ingredient. Yeah.
It is yeah. It's very, love is the ingredient, and there's always some little twists that you can't get from a recipe. Like even with my mom, on the occasions I've asked her how do you make this, or she's shown me things, I'll say, but how much do you put exactly of the cumin, coriander? And she'll be like, you just go like this.
I'm like, how much is
Yeah.
that? Counting the grains of roti, I'm like, is that 100 or is it 50?
Yeah.
I was like, Mom, don't just throw it
Also,
in. Like, I need to know how much.
yeah. I know. I get very caught up in the what is the exact measurement, and while I'm so busy writing it down, she's already on to like the third dish, and everything's turning out great.
So basically, I need a Karsh Kapoor who can cook.
Yes, let
Hmm.
me get to work on that.
Oh, please, I'd love you to be my Cupid. Like, go for it.
Yes. Oh, you never know. You never know. Sometimes when you put something out there, right? It's like when someone says, if you hear of an apartment that's going to become available, and then the next day you hear of an apartment. I'll
Yeah,
I'll I'll, I'll keep that thought in mind.
I'm excited.
But please send me the thepla recipe.
I will. I will. I have tried it a few times on my own, and it goes. I mean, it's the thipla are edible. They're lovely. Not as good as my
Yes.
mum's, but the recipe's the same. It's just, I just think I'm always rushing. I don't put in love. I'm like, like rolling them. I'm like, quick, quick, quick. Like I'm always in a rush. So I need to just, the way my nanny does it, she's so gentle and she's calm, and the way she speaks to her plants, and she's very like positive with everything. I need to be like that when I cook.
It's, I know what you mean. I feel like I wake up and I'm already behind for something a little bit. I
Yeah.
don't, I think it is part of this. It's what you were talking about earlier when you said it's not enough to do one thing. Everyone feels like they have to do so many different things.
Yeah.
And back to social media too. I think our brains are so fragmented now because in the distant past, if you only had a landline phone, if you weren't home, you just missed the call.
Yeah.
I've been around from the era before there were answering machines, and then like up to smartphones now. But now, you might get a Twitter message, you might get a WhatsApp message, you might get a text, you might get a phone call, you might have an email to answer, and you're also, unless you really draw a firm line, you're also constantly available because your phone is with you wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is.
Yeah.
People can still reach out, you can still reach out to people. And I think, when you were saying like all that scrolling, it is affecting us even if we think it's mindless scrolling. I think there are elements of that too that make your brain feel like they're going in multiple directions and for short
Mush.
increments too. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Part of me is just like mush now, and I'm like, how do I get this mush out of me? Just roll the mush away.
Yeah. Have you ever done sort of a, like taken an email break or a social media break or that kind of thing?
I mean, I try.
Yeah.
I do try. Um, On my
to-do list, you know, that list that never ends, I have...
Oh, I have one of them.
Yeah, it just gets longer.
I have the intention to have a phone-free day once a week. It's happened like twice this year. It's so difficult because I think when you're self-employed and you work for yourself, you know that if you don't do the work today, it's just more for you to do tomorrow. So
Hard.
you know, it becomes
It is
difficult. But you know, at the same time, I think for healing and for being in the moment and being present, it's vital. And I think there's going to be a prescription for it within the next few years. Like, don't use your phone.
I think you're right. And I think it is hard to do. I mean, I've had sort of accidental vacations for my phone and social media. Like we did a trip. No, once I did it on purpose when we went on a trip from the UK and I just turned my phone off for 10 days. And then other times it's just like if my phone broke or I was somewhere without a signal, I had sort of an enforced break. And I have to say it was amazing. Like the time that I had 10 days without my phone, but I really had missed nothing in 10 days of missing calls and messages. Like there are a few things that with that break, I realized were not things that were urgent. Because what happens, I think, when you don't take the break is things that actually aren't urgent start to seem urgent.
Oh, yeah.
There are things that are more urgent and time sensitive for sure. But everything starts to seem equally urgent. Like somebody saying, hey, how's it going? Starts to seem just as urgent as replying to someone about an event, whether you can do an event or not, you know?
Yeah, and it's so draining as well. And that's what I felt recently, that even just replying to my friends, I feel drains my energy. And I think because we're so absorbed in social media and other things which aren't really priorities, when it comes to ourselves, we don't really know how to be anymore, you know, because we're constantly giving parts of ourselves to everybody else, and then we're like, oh, okay, I've got like this much left for me. But I think it's so important for us to look after ourselves, especially when we're being creative, Tanuja. Especially.
It's affected me a lot, you know, being on my phone all the time and responding to people. And I think
people expect you now to respond straight away, and when you don't, they're like, what's wrong? And why didn't you reply? But you read it.
And it's like, oh, because I was trying to have a life. But that's not really allowed anymore. It's like, but you read it and you should have replied, and I messaged you again to check you're okay because you read my message and you didn't reply the first time. And I'm like, oh.
Like I was going to get back to you. I just thought I'd try and cook some thipla.
But you are so right for, you know, creative work, for being creative. And I include cooking the thepla, like when you described how, you know, your nanny, how you can cook slowly and with love. I think you really have to be in that zone that doesn't allow all of that, like all that chatter in the brain, right?
You have to have a mindset of Michael Jackson, like it's just love.
Love, like.
Where do you take your inspiration from then?
I find when I'm actually doing the work, inspiration is everywhere. I mean, it's kind of, you get obsessed with your work and then the whole world just starts showing you what you're looking for. So when I'm in that state of actually, you know, doing the kind of mundane thing of sitting down at the computer and just like trying to keep my butt in the chair without running away, screaming. Once I get into that zone, it literally appears everywhere. Like the next song I hear will somehow spark something that I need for the story. When I was in London, I remember, you know, when I'd go around during the first book, or the second book as well, I started to just like cast people, like random people. There was this woman who was always at the Tube at Ladbroke Grove when I was at the Tube at Ladbroke Grove, and she started to become Kavitha to me. And I knew nothing about her. I didn't follow her. I didn't get on the train with her and follow her around. I would just see her on the platform, and I had just kind of decided that that's maybe what Kavitha looked like, and that would sort of spark things for my character. Wow. So yeah, and then with when I was writing the club scenes, for example, or not just the club scenes, but with the club scenes particularly, I would play music in the apartment that I imagined would be playing in the club, like for the Bhangra club night, that kind of thing. But sometimes I would also play maybe not the music that would be playing in the club, but the music that would reflect more the mood, Dimple's mindset. Mm-hmm. So even if it's a kind of banging club night, maybe it's a like slower slower, more melancholy song that reflects Dimple's mood. So I did that as well. We didn't have neighbors, so that worked out quite well. I could kind of play music at any hour of the day, blast it for the club scenes, bring it down for the melancholy. And then generally speaking, I think for the stuff that kind of really drives me to make things, a lot of the inspiration is rooted in, as I'm sure you can tell by now, and seems to be the case for you too, family history, the idea of home, and where is home, and the idea that home is not actually a place. It's kind of it's a state of being. It's a sense of sanctuary. So, my own background, and then cities I've always found very inspiring. Like Born Confused in many ways is a love letter to New York City. Bombay Blues is one to Bombay, and the third one would be to London and the UK. And what else? And books, music, film, dance. I can't wait to see even more of your dancing, because I feel like all art forms can end up kind of feeding. If you're writing, music can feed that. If you're dancing, looking at a piece of artwork can feed the dance as well. And I make music also. So like for both books, I was also, with the first book, I did an album of songs based on the book, but that was done mostly after the book had already come out. Mm-hmm. And it was done partly with the band I was in London, and partly with the band that I had been in New York. And then with the second book, the Bombay book, I actually was writing the album. I started the songs even before the prose. And and I think that happened because I didn't know what to do with Bombay. Like with the first book, I had lived in New York for almost a decade. So at the very least, even if I was stuck on a particular moment, I could describe the setting. Like I had walked those streets so many times. I had been to the parties that I, was using as inspiration for the parties in the book. Bombay, the process of writing Bombay Blues was also a process of getting to know Bombay for me. Whereas writing Born Confused was more like looking back on a place that I had known and loved and drawing from that.
Yeah.
So the songs helped me a lot with Bombay Blues. So I wrote that album intertwined with the book writing process, and actually the book and album were finished within a few hours of each other. And my first kind of into the writing was I'd gone to Bombay with an outline, and on day 2 the outline went out the window because, as I'm sure you know, nothing goes to plan. Often nothing goes to plan in life, but nothing goes to plan in Bombay. So the outline was out the window, and I was just like, what is this book going to be about? I had written like a 25-page outline, and I thought, this isn't holding up now that I'm here. And when I came back from that trip, I came back and I sat down and just sat there staring at the blank page and thinking, I don't even know where to begin this process. And then I thought, okay, I'll just look at photos that I took. I took a lot of photographs there as notes, and also because Dimple would be taking photographs. And the photographs of Chor Bazaar, the flea market in Bombay, those ones ended up kind of catching my attention more than others at that moment in time. And I started looking at these photos I had taken of different antiques, like ship wheels and old cameras and, gods and goddesses and old letters and out records and vinyl and all of that. And I started to just do the very mechanical task of looking at the photos and writing a list of what was in the photos, what objects. And then that list started to kind of take on a melody in my head as I was writing. And I ended up writing, there's a song called Chor Bazaar, and I ended up writing the lyrics and melody to that song first. And then I literally took those lyrics and I stuck them in the Word document for the book. And then I changed the formatting so they were paragraphs instead of verses. And once I did that, it was all kind of very mechanical in the sense that I was just like cataloging what was in the photographs, and then, just changing the formatting to look book-like from looking song-like. And then I found that allowed me into the scene. Like just going through that process allowed me into the scene and, what was happening to the characters in Chor Bazaar. So that, I think that using other art form, using like other angles into your story can help a lot when you're feeling stuck.
Yeah, definitely.
What do you do? How do you find inspiration? And when you have a block, how do you kind of, break through it and work through it well, you do many things, so in dance or in acting, in any of your various fields.
So normally, this sounds very spiritual, but I will ask the universe or whoever's up there, I'm like, I need help, I'm stuck, tell me, or give me a sign, show me the way. And, you know, often when
some of my students book lessons with me, they say to me, I want to learn a routine to this song. Have you heard it? I'll send you the video. I'm like, don't send me the video, because I don't want to be influenced in terms of choreography based on what's already been done.
So normally I will listen to the song before I go to bed, and in the morning I kind of know what I'm choreographing. It's almost like subconsciously I've just choreographed it in my mind.
I wake up and I think, let me put the music on and see if it works with the beat, and if not, I make a few more adjustments and change it, but the majority of it is, touch wood, it is normally there.
But yeah, I think taking inspiration, like you said, from different art forms, asking for guidance when I need it, whether that's my dad, the astrologer, or somebody else, or someone bigger up there. And I think for me, taking inspiration from people that I know.
And people like yourself who have, you know, gone above and beyond and have really, the overachievers. I like the Indian female overachievers in the art, because there's not many of us there. You know, we're slowly building a nice little crowd. There's a nice little crowd of us slowly being built.
People like yourself inspire me, and I'm like, this is what I want to be like. And I think inspiration from people that you know is just a really beautiful thing.
Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, this celebrity inspired me, but there's so much inspiration within our own bubble. We just don't always see it.
Yeah. Well, I'm finding myself very inspired by you as well. Like, even when we started this conversation back in the spring by email, you know, there was already something there. And I think the work you're doing is amazing. Your whole persona is amazing. You have just such a generous, beautiful, loving spirit. It's just wonderful to see. And you hit the nail on the head, because it is actually the people in our lives. I mean, I do feel the same way. It's the people around you that end up being the greatest inspiration, because those are the ones who teach us how to be human, right? And, you know, with whom we kind of share this experience of going through life together, even in the most mundane, you know, day-to-day way.
Yeah. And I think sometimes people that you know can also inspire you, and you can recognize what you don't want to be like as well.
You know, I think it works both ways. Sometimes
Equally important. It's an equally important lesson, right?
Yeah, it is. As well as being beautifully inspired, you can be inspired in a way that's, you know, you recognize you don't want to have that quality or that element about you that you've seen in somebody.
I love what you said about asking for guidance too. I think that's so true as well. And I love that that's kind of an active part of your creative process. And it reminds me a little bit in a different way. When I was really having trouble writing, when I was in New York many years ago, a dear friend of mine, another Gwyn, who didn't steal anybody, but just some things reminded me of Gwyn. She gifted me, she's just a lovely, warm, caring human being. And she gave me a book called The Artist's Way. And have you done it?
This is what I mean. This is what I mean by asking the universe for signs and synchronicity.
I started reading that book last week, and I've been told to read it for 10 years. So the fact that you've mentioned that book to me, yeah.
That's amazing, because that book has been around a long time. And this was my experience with it was, you know, before writing Born Confused. So it was 1999 or something like that. And this friend gave it to me. I didn't know much about it. And this connects to other things we were saying too about like trying to have that quiet hour in the morning. Mm-hmm. The basic thing you have to do in this, I didn't finish the whole program, but it helped me in the way I needed help at the time. The thing that you have to do every day, there's different exercises every week, but every day you're supposed to get up and write 3 pages, ideally before you get out of bed and start your day at all. Like and the kind of thought process behind that is that you're still connected to your dream space. You're still connected to that subconscious space that you were just talking about that does so much of the work for us, and we don't realize it because it's subconscious. Mm-hmm. And it can be anything. There were days that I wrote, I'm exhausted, I hate this exercise, I can't stand this, I can't stand this, I can't, but you have to do the 3 pages, even if you just sit there and write like the same word for 3 pages. And in that process, like so much came up. There were days that were, you know, not much came up at all, or there were days that I just talked about, like wrote what I had done, or, you know, whined or wrote about like my self-doubt. And then there were moments when all of a sudden, like these memories I had from growing up, some of them were experiences of racism, some of them were very joyful experiences, but they were things that I hadn't thought about in years and years and years. And then they'd suddenly like appear, you know, on page 2 of the morning pages one day when I wasn't even actively thinking about any of this stuff. And even like the dressing up as an Indian girl for Halloween, something like that, I'd forgotten about that for many years. And a lot of things like that came up in these pages. And although they may not be directly in Born Confused, I am sure that this experience was a vital part of the process towards writing that book, because it was kind of a reconnect and just like surrendering to the subconscious and just letting, you know, a big thing you're supposed to do is not judge yourself. And part of the activity, like making those pages a daily, like kind of dull daily, not dull necessarily, but just like a daily activity, not like an exotic activity.
Yeah.
Part of it is just to start letting go of all the pressure of thinking like, oh my God, I have to write something great, and which builds up. Like the less you do it, the more it builds up, that pressure.
Yeah.
And the book also helps you start shutting off the negative voices in your head that might be your own. They may be things you've, you know, ingested from your surroundings, your culture, and just to free yourself to play and just to, you know, just to embrace yourself and accept whatever comes out of you. So that's so interesting. I very much recommend this book, and it's so interesting that it was just last week you started looking at it.
That's so odd.
Oh my God, that's so weird. This is what I mean, Tanuja. Things are meant to be.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity of spirit. Thank you for the love you've given Dimple. And I look forward to getting to know your art even better, and getting to know you even better as just a wonderful human that I can already see you are.
Thank you, Tanuja, and I look forward to meeting you in person. I know it will happen. I had this feeling in my heart at 12 years old that I would speak to you somehow. It would happen, and 20 years later we made that happen. And you can see I've got little post-it notes in here as well for my favourite parts of your book.
So so I hope I get to see you.
Oh, thank you for giving.
Oh, now I hope I get to see you before the next 20 years.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll speed it up a little bit this time.
Yeah.
Get the universe working faster this time.
As you said, we've thrown the idea out there, and now, you know, in some wonderful, mysterious way, it'll just end up happening.
And I've taken up so much of your time. I'm so sorry.
No, I have taken up yours. Don't be sorry. It was a real pleasure. It was really a pleasure. Yeah. I'm so glad we stuck with it and kept trying.
Oh, we'll keep in touch, Tanuja. Yeah?
Will do. You too. Take good care, and love to the whole family. Your nanny too.
Oh, thank you. Same here. Lots of love to you all.
See you later. Bye. Karsh Kapoor in Born Confused is an absolute babe, and I'm looking for a real life Karsh Kapoor.
He's out there looking for you too.
I hope so, because I'm a bit tired of looking now. He can come and find me.
Yes. There is a Karsh Kapoor out there, sitting there right now thinking, where is Ria?